She did not flinch when he said it. That was the part she would remember longest. Not the words themselves, but the stillness that came over her in the moment after, like the whole room had been pressed flat under glass. He had said it at dinner, in front of his mother and the two aunts who had come up from Richmond, and he had said it the way a man says something he has thought for a long time, and finally grown tired of keeping to himself. He looked at her across the white tablecloth and the silver candlesticks, and he said, "You have never been a handsome woman, Vera. I don't know why I expected otherwise." Mrs. Alderton set her fork down. One of the aunts, the younger one, whose name Vera could never keep straight, made a small sound that was not quite a gasp. Vera looked at her husband. His name was Roland Alderton, and she had been married to him for 2 years and 4 months, and she had never once, in all that time, heard him say anything so honest. She picked up her water glass. She took one sip. She set it down without a sound. Then she stood, pushed her chair back from the table with both hands, and curtsied. A full, deep, deliberate curtsy, the kind her mother had spent 3 winters teaching her, and she walked out of the dining room, up the stairs, and into the bedroom they shared at the end of the long hall. She did not cry. She had been saving that for something that surprised her. The trunk was old, older than the marriage, and it smelled of cedar and something else beneath that, her mother's house. Maybe, or the school in Philadelphia, where she had lived for 4 years before Roland's father's solicitor had appeared with a letter and a proposition. She packed slowly, not because she was uncertain, but because she had learned long ago that speed was a form of panic, and she refused to panic inside this house. She took her dresses. She took the leather writing case her father had given her the winter before he died. She took the book of botanical illustrations she had purchased herself, with her own money, from a shop on Chestnut Street 2 years before the wedding. The one that Roland had called a curious indulgence for a woman who doesn't garden. She left the jewelry he had given her. All of it. She laid each piece on the nightstand with the same care she would have given to returning borrowed things. Outside the window, the August night was heavy and still, and she could hear, faintly, through the floor, the sound of the dining room resuming. A chair scraped. Someone poured wine. Roland's voice, low and steady, said something that made the aunts laugh. She buckled the trunk. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands in her lap and thought, with a clarity that felt almost physical, "I will not spend another morning in this house." She was 24 years old. She had come to the Alderton house as the daughter of a family that had once had money and no longer did, which was, in the language of Virginia in 1858, a particular kind of disgrace. Her father, Mr. Harwick, had been a gentleman in the truest sense of the word. Gentle-tempered, gentle-voiced, gentle with his accounts in ways that proved in the end to be ruinous. He died when Vera was 21, leaving her and her mother with the house in Fredericksburg, and very little else. It was Vera's mother, Mrs. Harwick, a practical woman with a clear eye for circumstances, who had agreed to the arrangement with the Aldertons. Roland was 30, unmarried, and in need of a wife who was educated and presentable. The Harwicks needed financial security. It was not a romance. Everyone understood that it was not a romance, and no one said so, which was how such things were done. What Vera had not understood, until she was living inside it, was that Roland had not wanted a wife so much as he had wanted a particular kind of quiet. He wanted a woman who would sit across from him at dinner, without making demands on his attention. He wanted someone to manage the household, and be correct at social functions, and not require the kind of sustained emotional engagement that he found, she gradually came to understand, exhausting. She had tried to be that. She had managed the household. She had been correct at social functions. She had read her books quietly, and not required very much of him at all. And still, after 2 years and 4 months, he had looked at her across the white tablecloth, and told her she was not handsome. As though that were the issue. As though that were the whole of what she was. She was down the stairs, and out the side door, before the grandfather clock in the hallway had finished striking 10. She had planned nothing beyond the trunk and the hour. She had no destination, only the intention of leaving, which felt, in that moment, walking down the gravel drive in the dark with the trunk being carried behind her by the Aldertons' driver. A quiet man named Moss who asked no questions, and accepted the coins she pressed into his hand with a small grave nod, like the only reasonable response to the situation. She spent the first night at the inn in Culpeper, a modest place that smelled of wood smoke and boiled vegetables, and lay awake in the narrow bed listening to the sounds of the road and thinking, with a kind of detached clarity, about what she actually had. The writing case. The botanical book. $43 and some coins, which was the household money she had been given in trust, and which she intended to repay when she was able. A letter of reference from the minister at the church in town, which she had asked him for 6 months ago, telling herself she was simply being prudent, which was not exactly a lie. And this was the thing she kept returning to: her education. 4 years at the Hale Academy in Philadelphia. French, German, mathematics, rhetoric, natural history, drawing. Her teachers had said she had a gift for clarity. Her compositions had been read aloud. One of her instructors, an older woman named Miss Pruitt, who wore the same brown dress every day and had opinions about everything, had told her once, "You think precisely, Miss Harwick. That is rarer than you know." She thought about Miss Pruitt for a long time in the dark. Then she fell asleep. She found work in Charlottesville at a small school for girls run by a woman named Mrs. Dunmore. The introduction came through a cousin of a former schoolmate, the kind of connection that only exists in the specific social geography of Virginia, where everyone is 3 acquaintances from everyone else. Mrs. Dunmore was a widow in her late 50s, sharp-featured and exacting and almost entirely without sentimentality, and she hired Vera to teach composition and arithmetic to the younger girls after a single conversation that felt more like an examination. "Your husband," Mrs. Dunmore said, during that conversation, not as a question. "We are separated," Vera said. The word felt strange in her mouth, like a coin from another country. Miss Dunmore looked at her for a long moment. "Can you teach?" "Yes." "Then that is what matters here." Vera moved into the small room above the school's back staircase, which smelled of chalk and old paper, and the particular dry warmth of a building that has been heated by wood stoves for many decades. She taught 6 days a week. She wrote lesson plans by lamplight. She ate her meals in the kitchen with Miss Dunmore's cook, a forthright woman named Hattie, who talked constantly about her sister in Baltimore, and who within 2 weeks had appointed herself the informal manager of Vera's nutrition and sleep habits. "You're too thin," Hattie said. The first time she saw Vera go to bed without eating. "Whatever happened to you? You can't fix it on an empty stomach." Vera started eating her meals at the table. She did not allow herself to think about the Alderton house very much. When she did think about it, in the early mornings sometimes, when she was grading compositions by the window, and the light was coming up slow and gray over the rooftops, she thought not about Roland, but about the specific quality of silence in that house. The way the rooms held it, the way it had accumulated, over 2 years, like sediment. She had not known, until she was no longer in it, how much of herself she had spent trying to fill that silence without making noise. She had been in Charlottesville for 6 weeks when Mrs. Dunmore put her in front of the school's board of trustees. It was not an interrogation exactly. 3 men, a banker, a rector, and a retired judge named Mr. Calloway, sat at one end of a long table and asked her about her education and her methods and her opinions on the proper aims of instruction for young women. Vera answered each question directly, without hedging, and when the banker asked whether she believed arithmetic was a suitable subject for girls, she said, "I believe any subject is suitable for anyone capable of learning it, and in my experience, the girls here are capable of learning a great deal." There was a short silence after she said that. Then Judge Calloway, who was 70 years old and had the look of a man who has spent decades watching people waste his time, made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and said, "All right, that's clear enough." She was given the position formally the following week: composition, arithmetic, and geography, for the 3 younger classes, with the understanding that she would also assist with the school's correspondence and record keeping, which had fallen into some disorder since the departure of the previous teacher. She set the record straight in 11 days. Mrs. Dunmore told her it had taken the previous teacher 2 months to create the disorder in the first place. Vera did not say what she was thinking, which was that she had been managing the accounts and correspondence of a household for 2 years and 4 months, and had done it without anyone noticing, which was apparently how you knew you were doing it well. Roland's letter arrived on a Thursday in October. It came through her mother, who had been told where Vera was in the strictest confidence and who had, apparently, held that confidence for exactly 4 weeks, before deciding that a reconciliation was her daughter's best available option, and that the kindest thing she could do was facilitate it. The letter was short. Roland was not a man who wrote at length. He said that she had been gone long enough, and that he hoped she had recovered herself, and that he would appreciate her return at her earliest convenience, as the household was being managed badly in her absence, and the situation was becoming an embarrassment. Vera read it twice. Then she folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the leather writing case, in the section she used for things she needed to keep, but did not need to revisit. She wrote back 1 week later. She said she was well and that she hoped he was also well, She said she was employed and had no immediate plans to return. She said she wished him no difficulty, and meant it, and that she hoped the household situation would resolve itself. She did not say, "You told me, in front of your mother and her sisters, that I had never been handsome, as though that were a failing I had committed against you. As though being a woman who was not beautiful was something I had chosen to be in order to inconvenience you." She did not say any of that. She sealed the envelope and gave it to Hattie to post, and then went upstairs and taught 2 hours of arithmetic to a group of 12-year-old girls who were currently engaged in the deeply satisfying project of learning that they could, in fact, do things they had been told were beyond them. She heard about Roland's situation from her cousin Georgette, who had heard it from a friend in Richmond, which was how information moved in Virginia, not through post or proclamation, but through the specific gravity of women who paid attention. Apparently the household had not, in fact, resolved itself. The cook had left. There had been some trouble with the accounts. Roland's mother, Miss Alderton, who had sat so still when he said what he said at dinner, had taken to her room with a complaint of nerves and remained there, issuing requests through the housemaid. And Roland himself had been seen at the church in a state that Georgette, who was tactful, described as unsettled. Vera absorbed this information and felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not sympathy, not the complicated ache she had half expected. Only a mild, clear-eyed observation, like noting a change in the weather. Things have consequences. What she felt more strongly, and with a vividness that surprised her, was this. She was glad she was not there. She was glad she was in this chalk-smelling room above the back staircase, with her lesson plans on the desk, and Hattie's voice, coming up through the floorboards, and the girls' compositions, stacked in a neat pile on the left side of the desk, full of the imprecise and earnest attempts to describe the world as they understood it. She was glad for the cold morning air, and the sound of the town beginning its day outside the window. She was glad for the $11 she had saved, and the letter of commendation Mrs. Dunmore had written for her file. And the fact that Judge Calloway had said all right, that's clear enough, as though clarity were, in itself, a credential. She had not known, before all of this, how much she had wanted simply to be seen, not as Roland's wife, not as the Harwick girl who had married above her family's current circumstances, not as the daughter-in-law who managed the household adequately but had never been, as her husband had seen fit to note, a handsome woman, just seen, for what she could actually do, for how she actually thought, by people who had no particular investment in the story of what she was supposed to be. It was a modest thing to want, she knew. But she had learned, in the past 3 months, that modest things could sustain a person considerably further than she had previously understood. Roland came himself in November. She had not expected that. She had expected another letter, maybe, or a message through her mother, or nothing at all. Roland was not, by nature, a man who made trips for the sake of other people's feelings. He arrived at the school on a Tuesday afternoon, driving himself in the smaller of the 2 carriages. And Vera was in the middle of a geography lesson when Mrs. Dunmore appeared in the doorway and said, in the tone of a woman announcing a weather event, that there was a Mr. Alderton in the front room. She dismissed the class. She washed her hands at the basin. She walked down the stairs and into the front room where Roland was standing by the window, holding his hat, looking at the street outside. He looked older, maybe, or perhaps just tired. She had not seen him in nearly 4 months. And the particular quality of his tiredness was not the kind she recognized from before, the comfortable tiredness of a man who has had a full week, but something more unmoored, like a man who had been misplacing things and could not work out what. "Vera," he said, when he heard her. "Roland." He looked at her for a moment, and she let him and did not fill the silence. "I said something inexcusable," he said, finally. She waited. "At dinner, in August, I said something inexcusable, and I have thought about it a great deal." "I know what you said," Vera told him. "You don't need to repeat it." He pressed his lips together. He turned the hat in his hands. "I did not mean—" He stopped. "I don't know what I meant. That is the honest answer." "I believe you," she said. And she did, which was the strange thing about it. She believed that he had not meant it the way a man means something he has planned. She believed it had been the specific cruelty of thoughtlessness, which was, in some ways, worse than intention, because you could argue with intention. Thoughtlessness just happened to you, the way weather happened. "I would like you to come home," he said. She considered that for a long moment. Outside, through the window, she could hear the sound of one of the older girls reciting something in the upstairs classroom. French verbs, she thought, from the rhythm. And the distant sound of a cart on the street. And somewhere further off, the particular damp metal smell of autumn coming in from the hills. I don't think I will, she said. Not yet. Roland blinked. She could see that he had not prepared for not yet. He had perhaps prepared for no, and he had certainly prepared for yes, but not yet occupied a territory he had not mapped. There are things I need to ask of you, she said, if you want me to consider it. He looked at her. Ask. Your mother cannot live in the house with us. She said it without apology and without anger, the same way she would have stated a mathematical condition. That is not negotiable. Something crossed his face that she couldn't entirely read. She is my mother. I know who she is. She can visit. She cannot live there. She paused. And I want an accounting. A real one. Not the summary you give me each month. I want to see the books. All of them. I want to understand what we have and what we owe and how the decisions are made. She met his eyes. I've been managing your household for 2 years without understanding its finances. I don't intend to do that again. The silence in the room was different now from the silence in the Alderton dining room. From the silence she had spent 2 years trying to fill. This silence belonged to her. Roland turned his hat in his hands one more time. Those are significant conditions, he said. I know, Vera said. They are also fair ones. He stood there for a long moment, and she watched him think, and she did not help him. She had helped him think for 2 years and 4 months, filling in the edges of conversations, smoothing the places where he ran out of words. She did not do that now. She simply stood, in the chalk-smelling room she had made her own, and waited for him to work it out himself. I'll need time, he said at last, to speak with my mother. Take whatever time you need. She said it without cruelty and without warmth. I will be here. He nodded once, put his hat on, and left. Mrs. Alderton came 3 weeks later. Vera had not expected that either. She had expected a letter from Roland, saying it was settled or that it wasn't, or another long silence of the kind they had both become so practiced in. She had not expected Roland's mother to appear at the school on a Wednesday morning, alone, having apparently driven herself from Culpeper without telling anyone she was coming. She was a small woman, Mrs. Alderton. Vera had always noticed that, how much authority she commanded for someone so physically contained. She sat in the front room's straight-back chair, with her hands in her lap and her back very straight, and she looked at Vera with an expression that was difficult to name. Not quite remorse. Not quite pride. Something in between that had not quite resolved itself yet. I want to say something, she said, without preamble. All right, Vera said. I was unkind to you. She said it carefully, like a woman reading from a prepared text she has written many times and kept revising. Not all at once. In small ways over a long time. I knew what I was doing and I told myself it was. I told myself I was protecting Roland, that he had made a practical match and I was simply managing expectations. Vera waited. That was not what I was doing, Mrs. Alderton said. The room was very quiet. He is not happy, she said, without you. I did not think it would matter so much. She paused. I did not think you would matter so much. Vera felt something, not vindication, exactly, but something in the vicinity of it. The complicated relief of being seen finally, as a person who mattered. I appreciate you saying that, she said. And then, because she was a woman who believed in clarity. You understand that if I return, things will be different. Roland explained your conditions. She said conditions without inflection, which Vera took as progress. They're not unreasonable. This was Mrs. Alderton, saying it herself, without being asked, as though she had decided, somewhere between Culpeper and Charlottesville, that the time for a certain kind of pretending was over. No, Vera agreed, they are not. Mrs. Alderton looked at her for a long moment, then she looked around the room, at the chalk dust on the windowsill, at the stacked books, at the composition papers on the table, at the particular lived-in quality of a room where real work had been done. You've built something here, she said. It was not quite an accusation. Yes, Vera said. I have. They sat together for a few minutes without speaking, which was a different kind of silence from any of the silences Vera had experienced in that family before. It was not comfortable, exactly. But it was honest, and she had come to value honesty above comfort, which was perhaps the main thing she had learned in 4 months in a room above a back staircase in Charlottesville. She did not tell Mrs. Dunmore she was leaving until she had decided for certain. She did not decide for certain until Roland had come back a second time and they had talked, really talked, the way they had never managed to do in 2 years and 4 months, about what they were and what they had made and what they might, if they were careful and honest, make instead. She told Mrs. Dunmore on a cold morning in December, and Mrs. Dunmore heard her out and then said, in her dry, unornamented way, I suspected this was coming. You'll leave the records in order, of course, Vera said. And you'll write me if they don't treat you properly. Vera looked at her. And if I do? Then I'll write them a letter, Mrs. Dunmore said, in the tone of a woman who has written a number of letters in her time and knows exactly what they can accomplish. I have a great deal of practice making disagreeable things clear. Vera smiled. It was the first time in a long while that she had smiled at the prospect of going back. She returned to the Alderton house on the 22nd of December, 3 days before Christmas. In the late afternoon, when the light came low and gold through the bare trees, and the frost on the ground made everything look like it had been pressed and set. Mrs. Alderton had moved to the smaller house on the property, the one that had been the groundskeeper's and had been sitting empty for years, which she had apparently thrown herself into fixing up with a thoroughness that Roland reported with a kind of dazed respect. Roland met her at the door. He looked as he had in Charlottesville, that unmoored tiredness still there but different now, shaded with something she hadn't seen before. Intention, maybe. The look of a man who has decided something and intends to see it through. He took the trunk from the cart himself. She walked through the door she had left through in August, and the house smelled the same, beeswax and wood smoke, and the particular paper and leather smell of all those rooms. But it felt different. Or perhaps she was the one who was different. She was not certain it mattered which. The books are in the study, Roland said when they were inside. All of them. I had them set out. She looked at him. You said you wanted to understand the finances, he said. I thought we might start there. She set her traveling bag down by the foot of the stairs. That was the right thought, she told him. She did not say, I was afraid, leaving, in a way I didn't let myself feel until I was already gone. She did not say, I spent 4 months becoming a person I recognized, and I'm not willing to lose that again. She did not say any of the things that were true but were best understood over time, through the slow accumulation of days, through the long and imperfect work of two people choosing, morning after morning, to be honest with each other. She said, show me the books. And he did.